The parks are for the community, right? Parks were built for children to play. Parks were built for families to go and have a picnic. Parks were built for people to ride their bikes. So to answer your question, no, I do not believe.
Absolutely not. They are part of our public trust, and these are areas that we should cherish. I also believe that if you actually look at the rest of the district, we have some severely underfunded and underperforming parks. So down in Bethune, for example, our parks are struggling. There are shootings right around them on a regular basis. And if you go down there and you compare that to what's going on in Jersey City, we're just not doing it right now. And there are some very basic things we've been doing that are not very expensive in terms of investing in the basics of the jungle gyms, making sure that we have some sort of basic security around there. And small things like paving the roads just create an aura of quality that people will start respecting the park. So if you start increasing the quality of our parks, people will also have an increased respect for their community. So I actually think we need to respect our parks more. We need to bring art spaces to the parks. We need to engage in them just like they do up in Liberty State Park, and to do it all over the district. Lastly, I think there's more than enough land in the 31st District to focus on not only high-rises and luxury condominiums, but bringing jobs and businesses back to the area. Because we have a lot of decaying warehouses, and over the next 30 years, there's going to be a ton of jobs needed in the manufacturing district to build all of the robotic and automated technology of the future. And we have more than enough opportunity here to say, let's build mixed-use facilities that have jobs, that have offices, that have art spaces, that have residences to them. And we have a lot of stuff on the waterfront. If you go, I ride my bike and walk around the waterfront all the way down the peninsula. There are a lot of decaying industrial lands that are dirty, that need to be cleaned up, and we should be focusing our time there and not be taking away resources from the public, which are our public parks. Thank you.
I'm totally against privatizing Liberty Park and any other park in the area. I think we need more open space. I think our children, and they haven't had enough. We haven't given them enough. We need to give them more open space where they could be children, where they could play, and where they could get a beautiful view of not only New York but everything else that's around them. So we need to focus on giving more rather than privatizing and selling our city away to these big companies that come and form these big towers and get tax abatements, and we end up paying the taxes anyway. So let's focus on more open space and taking care of our children.
Candidates before me, parks already been privatized. Privatized over 10 years ago. You guys didn't realize that? Liberty National was there. Liberty National, a private golf club, was put in Liberty Park. So the question is not now, will we privatize the park? The question is now, will we stop the continuing privatization of the park? That's the real question. Are we going to allow a $1 million golf course that you have to pay almost $1 million to have a membership to continue the privatization of the park? No, you can't do it. But as far as the park being privatized, it already started about 10 years ago when Liberty National was out, when Liberty National was built there. And that's something I was trying to stop at that time, and no one saw what it was. Now you're not, look at that golf facility. Wouldn't that have been a beautiful public golf course that the citizens of Hudson County in New Jersey could have accessed instead of giving it away to billionaires? I'll tell you one thing, Bob Kraft is lucky. The New England Patriots owner, he loves that we didn't do that. Thank you.
In regard to future private development of Liberty State Park, my answer is categorically no. It's that simple. Sam Pessin has been a good friend of mine for a number of years, dating back to over my 10 years in government. I've been a friend of Liberty State Park for a number of years, and the Pessin family and the friends of Liberty State Park have done a Herculean feat fighting against government and private developers, and I'll support them all the way. I think there are other issues that we need to talk about also. The reality is that a significant portion of that park is still heavily contaminated. And we don't talk about ways that we can get it cleaned up and convert it to more open space. If you go down there on a beautiful Saturday afternoon, the reality is that next to the rail station is packed with people picnicking and playing frisbee and happy Saturday. We need more open space, not less. Now let me just close on this issue by saying Senator Sweeney recently dropped a bill returning the decision-making process into local hands. This is a local issue. It should not be decided by some group appointed by the governor or anyone else out in the Meadowlands. This is a local decision, and we need to take back control, so I would support that legislation in order to stop any sort of future development in Liberty State Park. Thank you.
I'm totally against any more privatization, because Bruce is right. It's already started.
And there's other places to develop, and the Peninsula is one of them. So again, I'm against it, and we should look, if they want to do some development, look somewhere else where they need development, and not the parks.
I actually think of growing up and taking a walk down there with 20 of my friends and hiding in those huts while we're playing manhunt, or walking along swampy areas and visiting the museum. I would hate to think that it wouldn't be there. I actually take my kids there on a regular basis during the summer. I show them how we used to play manhunt, where we used to hide, and just everything that I saw when I was growing up. I try to show that to my kids. Like I said, I would just hate to think that that park is not going to be there in the future. I would not support any legislation that would bring that park into more privatization. Like everyone up here has said, there's a lot of area here that could be developed. There's a lot of areas, especially within Jersey City, Ward F, that are underdeveloped, and we need to focus our attention on those areas, leave the parks alone.
So this gets to the heart of our policing policy and how we create proper crime policy. I think the balance of the weight of the argument is in favor of having localized requirements for public safety officers for this one reason. I'm generally against mandated rules that dictate how certain organizations are run, but in a situation that requires public safety like policing, and when we talk about community policing, that's what she's asking about. You're saying, how do you get people who are representative of the community policing the community that they're supposed to be serving? And that's how you do it. You have people from the community. So, you can call it a mandate, you can call it, some sort of government intervention, but this is a critical issue because in a lot of areas, all over the country, including here and including all of the South, that has resulted in so much unrest and so much extension of the pernicious and terrible history of racism in this country. We need to have community police, and we need to have people in the police forces who are representative of the populations that they serve, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to build trust within these communities, because you're going to have a police officer who you know personally, who you know lives right up the street. And that's going to be, there's a lot more work to do after that. That's going to be the tip of the iceberg, but that's one thing we can definitely do to make sure we start changing the trend of crime policy in America. I think we also need to start looking at stop outfitting our police with military equipment, but I don't want to get off topic. So I think community policing is a great way to start.
Well, I think I've answered that question in the past. I stood here. I'm a police officer, and I'm here in Jersey City. And the reason why I'm here is because I believe we should have our police officers living here. I know it's not a popular thing to say among officers, but we should, because the best person that can come to your house when you have a problem is your next door neighbor, or someone that knows you. Or when you commit some kind of infraction, if you're going to get pulled over, then let it be somebody you know, and somebody who's going to give you good advice and not go off like some out-of-towner. So I am all for cops staying here, although it's not a popular thing to say amongst police officers. I do want them to stay here. I do want police officers to serve the community, because whatever you do, if you live in the city that you work for, you're going to take better care of it. Even if it's not public safety, if you work for maintenance and you're picking up garbage, you're not going to throw that piece of gum wrap on the floor. So let's keep our employees here, and let's keep hiring them from Jersey City. It's not just keeping them here once they get the job, or asking them to move here, giving them a job, because it's easy for someone to come from out of town and move to Jersey City because they're making $100,000 a year. Let's hire from within. Let's keep our cops here, but let's hire the people from here. Let's start hiring from Lincoln and Ferris and Snyder and Dickinson and all our schools. Let's hire the cops from there. Let's hire the firefighters from there. Stop bringing people from out of town. This is why I'm here, because I stood here and I'm totally against all this out-of-town hiring. We have enough qualified people in Jersey City and the 31st district to hire people from within our home.
You saw it recently, it was featured on Real Jersey City. Jersey City police officer doesn't live in Jersey City, goes out of town, it's a DUI. What happens? Jersey City police officers go down here and get him, and they cover it up. It's not charged or anything. If he's living in Jersey City, he'll be held accountable. The other thing is this: don't expect Mayor Davis or Mayor Fuller to allow these HCDO candidates to support that type of legislation. I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you why. Because both of those mayors ran on a commitment that their directors would live in Jersey City. And each of them is broken. the director, the chief of staff for Bayonne, and the business administrator don't live in Bayonne, and there's a city ordinance that requires them to live in Bayonne. And they don't live in Bayonne. In Jersey City, the director of public works doesn't live in Jersey City. I'm not sure if the police director ever actually moved to Jersey City yet, but there's other directors in Jersey City. So I'm very interested in how Mr. McKnight and Mr. Chiaravalloti are going to answer this question, because they're in a box right now, and this will say a lot. Thank you.
You know, there's this myth that because you have the support of other elected officials, that you can't think for yourself. Someone who's worked at the municipal level, I can tell you, I wouldn't have only wanted public safety officials to live in the city, you know. I would have rather all the employees. I actually agree with Ray. Now, do I think the reality, now, everyone in this room knows we can say that, but getting a law passed and getting it upheld is darn near impossible. Okay? So that's where I stand on this issue. I will say this though, I also think though, you know, it involves two things. One is about community. Okay, the reality is when I was a teenager and I was able to ride my bike down to Vet Stadium, the police officer who came and picked me out and said, hey, Chiaravalloti, it's time to get home, was a guy who served in Vietnam with my dad, so I knew if I didn't get home, he knew my father. The second thing, on a more serious note, is that we lived through 9/11. We know what happens when we can't have our emergency personnel get back into the community. And the reality is, 9/11, it was almost impossible once they closed down the Turnpike Bridge for emergency personnel. And you can't be short-staffed in that sort of crisis. So I would support it. I don't look. The reality is, I don't think we're upstanding, but I would support it.
The fire department, the teachers, municipal employees, definitely, if you make a salary here in Jersey City, you should live here in Jersey City. But I think, as Earl Morgan pointed out last week, that it's unconstitutional. I think, if I heard right, that they can't move out of Jersey City. So with that said, I believe that there should be incentives for the police, the fire. And number one, when they're first hired, they do have to live here, I think a minimum of a year or two. And they have to live here. When they get those jobs, they have to be residents here. So again, I am for them. I believe firmly they should be living here to make that salary. But again, if it's unconstitutional, they can't. We should find ways, incentives to keep them here. Tax breaks, somehow, some way to keep them to live here, because it is important that they stay here and they live here and they're from here. When they're hired, they are from here. I know the Board of Education, you cannot get a job unless you are from Jersey City. But unfortunately, once you get the job, then you move out of Jersey City. So there's got to be incentives to keep them here. Some way, somehow, to keep them here, because it is important. There's nothing like knowing the cop who lives here. As I grew up, most of the cops lived here. They stayed here. They lived here, and it was the best way of policing. The same thing, I believe, with firemen. The same thing with teaching. Not saying that teachers that don't live here wouldn't care, but teachers that do live here, they would care, just like policemen and firemen, so I am for them the same.
When you talk about community policing, I said this before, and I'll continue to say it, I believe that the police officer in your area should look like the person sitting next to you. They should be your neighbors. You should know them by name. They should know you by name. Now, we need to get to the real issue here. The real issue is not getting them back. It's why are they leaving in the first place? When you're hired to a municipality as a public safety, as a police officer, you have to live in that area, in that city. Why are they leaving? And it's very simple. Because the development that has been going on in Bayonne and in Jersey City has been catering to a clientele that is not from the area. We're catering to wealthy developers, rich one-percenters, and we're pricing our law enforcement out. Quite frankly, they cannot afford to live in some of these areas, and that's the problem. So until we start having more affordable housing and start catering to our community, we'll be able to keep those law enforcement officers in the community.
When you talk about community policing, when I was in high school, I knew a few police officers, and it made me feel great. As an adult, I still see some police officers that went to school with me, and I'm like, wow, you're protecting and serving. So I support having community policing right here in our city. It strengthens our community.
First of all, I'd like to say that it's not a myth that when the ACDO puts you there, it's culture. You know, they put you there, you're going to do what they say. That's why they put you there. That's why they maintain their candidates, and that's what we're trying to change. That's what we need to change. But now let's get, of course the taxes are too high. I'm a homeowner here, I pay high taxes. We all agree that taxes are too high. How do we solve this problem? I said it before, tax these millionaires. Give them 1% tax increase, tax them, and that'll solve a lot of tax issues here in New Jersey. You start taxing the millionaires, stay away from the middle class people. I don't know how many middle class make $200,000, but I sure don't. But you start taxing the rich, not the poor, and you look into this, let's look into this ExxonMobil thing, you know, $225 billion settlement. We should have got over $6 billion for this. Why aren't we looking for that? That's where the money is. We get the money from there, and that's where we're going to get money from to fund to help lower our taxes. You could get it from there, or you could tax these millionaires. That's what I feel.
The real question is this: can we reduce property taxes in a state that we have a pension crisis, that we have a transportation funding crisis? Can we do it? But these legislators, you can go down and train and say, you know what, we're going to lower your taxes. It's not going to happen, not with the problems that we have right now. There's a key word, it's called stabilization. We have to stabilize these taxes right now. And that's the hardest thing that any elected official will ever tell you. Because the quickest thing to say is, I'm going to reduce something, and they can't tell you what they're going to decrease in order to reduce it. So what I'm going to tell you is this: I'm going to work to stabilize the taxes. And the way I'm going to work to stabilize the taxes is, number one, is make some hard and difficult choices on the budget. We're going to see what's working, what's not working, what can be applied to give homeowners a rebate. But what bothers me in the 31st district right now is we don't have the ability to buy homes. Because if you look at what happened in the Washington Post today, it's harder for a minority to get a loan now, just as it was 50 years ago. So if you have a home right now and you have property taxes you can't afford, at least you do have a part of the American dream. But I can tell you, I'm going to help you preserve your American dream by helping you stabilize the taxes. And if I'm able to reduce them later, I will do so. Thank you.
Before I answer the question, just on the ExxonMobil settlement, which is an abomination any way you look at it, especially shortchanges the local communities are impacted by it. There are a lot of passionate community activists in this room. Next Wednesday in Bayonne City Hall at 10:30, the Assembly Committee is having a public hearing on the ExxonMobil settlement. So I know there are a lot of community groups here. Hopefully they'll advertise it, but hopefully we'll see some of you there. Look, if you don't think property taxes are too high in the 31st, then you don't own a home, all right? Property taxes are way too high. I think Bruce is right when he discusses stabilization. But we have to look at where our property taxes go, right? 50% or more of our property taxes go to education. And you know, at the last debate I talked about the language of scarcity, how our language has changed in trend, where in the 1980s and early 90s, we were talking about how we changed funding of education. And now all we talk about is, oh, we're just going to cap the funding of education. It doesn't work. These caps, these caps are fallacies. You could say 2%, but if you make an exception for everything under the sun, it's not 2%. I mean, show of hand, whose taxes went up by 2% or less since that cap has been passed? No one. The reality is that we want to address property taxes, okay? And it's not, I agree with Bruce, cutting them is tough, all right? It's about stabilizing. But we need to have a real discussion about how we fund education in the state of New Jersey. Thank you.
There's, besides Ray, what he said about taxing millionaires, which I actually agree with, but 1% taxing millionaires would help with taxes. Also, you have to stop abatements. Abatements. There was property downtown on the waterfront, they're not paying any taxes. The rest of the city is paying the taxes. for those people there. That's why our taxes are so high. So abatements need to be stopped, or they need to be slowed down. Definitely doing the abatements. So we're paying the taxes in different parts of the city. The second thing is we get more middle class paying jobs. Because with that, it will fuel the economy, and again, people will come off government assistance, and that money there can be used to lower their taxes. So I definitely think there's some solutions where we can lower the taxes. And then I'm trying to give all these corporations these tax breaks, and let them start paying a little bit more also, so we can get a break on our taxes. Thank you.
Talk about taxes on a local, state, or federal level. What we're really talking about is a failure in leadership. When we have representatives and elected officials who make millions of dollars because they hold multiple positions in county, city, and state government, that's a problem. The other problem is the abatements in the 31st district and in the state, quite frankly, are just being abused. We talked about bringing, education. Let me go back a little bit. When we talk about an abatement and a developer getting abatement, what's happening is the portion of the taxes that they're paying are going to the city, and they don't pay any county or education tax, Board of Education tax. So that is put strictly on the homeowners in the community. So when the Board of Education or the school districts say, hey, we need more money, or the county says we need more money, who's left to front that burden? It's the rest of us. If my opponent really wants to stabilize taxes and really wants to do something, he should go back to his clients at the military ocean terminal and get them to switch that from a 30-year abatement and let them pay the taxes to put the money into the public schools and stabilize the rest of the taxes in the city of Bethune.
I've been a homeowner for over 10 years, and I don't like to see my taxes go up. Now, we have to look at education. As my running mate Nick said, there is a lot of money in education that we should look at for taxes. The next thing is tax abatements. There's a report from 2010, it's called The Problematic Examination of Municipal Taxes. And that report that was issued in 2010 gives us solutions and identifies problems. However, we're not looking at those solutions and we're not looking at those problems. So what we need to do collectively, revisit the long-term abatements together, all stakeholders, school districts, community leaders, developers, so that everyone can understand what these tax abatements are. Also, the language in the tax abatements, make sure that they are clear and transparent, and throughout the duration of these tax abatements, we need to have checks and balances to make sure that the tax abatements are being fairly and are being done. That is what's called checks and balances.
I'd like to ask a question to the audience. Please raise your hand if you own your own home. Yeah, so having done some research on this, we're actually substantially below the national average in home ownership. We're about at 40%. The national average is about 60%. So when we're talking about reducing property taxes, it's typically we're talking about lowering taxes for 40% of people. That said, I have four points that I would like to stress about how we're going to actually get some sanity into our local government. The first one is we need to audit every division of government, because a lot of people say things about corrupt politics in New Jersey and politics in New Jersey in general, and I'll tell you, if you get an auditor and a special prosecutor looking into every deal and where all the money flows down in Trenton and in the local municipalities, there's going to be a lot of people going to jail, and there's going to be a lot more money back in Trenton. Secondly, we need to create more jobs in the area. Look, I don't care what party you're from, I will work with Mayor Davis and I'll work with Mayor Phillips to make sure that we are bringing these enterprise zones, to make sure that we're bringing light industry and manufacturing jobs back to the area, because we're about to enter a new age of manufacturing, because everyone's street sweeper is going to be automated, your backyard lawnmower is going to be automated, your vacuum cleaner is going to be automated. We have so many great, fantastic, skilled people in this area. Everyone I meet either has some sort of machining skill or other hard skill that's going to be put to use over the next couple of decades. We need to make sure that we're ahead of the curve so that when those jobs are ready, we're going to be the capital of the world. We're going to be the 21st century technology hub of the world, not over there in Silicon Valley or in Asia and China. Thirdly, we need sensible, demand-based abatement policy. The 30-year abatements need to be right here in Ward F, not down by the waterfront. Lastly, we can write out corruption in Trenton.
Friends, when you don't have a good answer, the best thing to say is to agree with your partner over there. If you're going to change the traffic patterns. I think that the big problem is, if you want to change the traffic patterns, you need to consult with the residents in the city where you're changing the patterns. The state comes in, they change all the traffic patterns. They're not from Jersey City, but they do come in here and do their $1 million studies, and they change the traffic pattern, and then the result is 440 is all messed up, and we're all backed up, and that's a big problem. Number two is Port Authority. Port Authority is a huge problem. That's where our problem is. Let's make Port Authority pay their dues. Forget about taxing the malls and stuff. We don't need more taxes. Sorry, we don't need more taxes. We need Port Authority to pay their share. We need Port Authority to come up with their money and to be fair. $13 across for Harlem Tunnel is a lot of money. You know, so let's say, and number three, let's expand this light rail. I think that's a great idea. I do agree with the others on expanding the light rail, making it easier and more accessible to more people.
All right.